put out the challenge to see if you can find the surprise visitors not from Texas. You don't have to do that. But I'm so grateful to have everybody here. I am going to do a little bit of confessing as we get going here. I usually can fall asleep when I want to, but boy, in the last week I have not been able to. And last night, I'm not sure I slept at all. Every time I'd close my eyes, I'd be thinking, I got to tell somebody about the power line coming from the kitchen to the electrical box, and I got to tell somebody else about where some food is, and I got to tell somebody where, I got to find somebody that has a trailer with a hitch that can pick up the rototiller tomorrow. That's still a living problem. But I have been so anxious about this, and I don't usually get anxious. So I am looking forward. I don't want the Texans to leave, but I am so looking forward to Friday to see if this gets pulled off. And so I hope you guys are as well. I do want to tell all of our friends from Texas today that if anybody starts calling you, the Highway 50 coming up from Delta has been closed since 6 o'clock this morning in this direction. There is no estimated time for opening it. The reroute there is going to take your friends over the Grand Mesa, which will be beautiful, but it's going to take them a little extra time to get here. So if you're talking to them, if they're coming that way, I don't know that there's any way to avoid that detour at this point. You gotta start in Denver to not have that happening to you. So we're thinking about them, and you can be praying for that as well. So much work is going to be happening, and I want to just know Pam is probably downstairs with the little kids, but since we moved into this building in 2011, about once every 3 months, Pam brings a request to the leadership team to level the counters in the kitchen. And I keep telling her, no, that'll cost $35,000. And she's like, no, just like raise the cabinets up a little. I'm like, you can't. So Pam is so happy that the counters are going to be level. And my thing is the door for the men's room back here. Today is probably the last day that door is ever going to be a part of our church family. And I am willing to put it in the dumpster myself. That door has been the bane of our existence forever. Every Sunday we get 2 little boys trapped in there. And it's quite often the same 2. And so we are looking forward to everything that you all are going to help us with this week. And just can't thank you enough for being here. And I know there's a lot of you still on the way, but I can't. Those of you who are here, we're just so very, very grateful. We have been working through a sermon series called Flowing Faith. And what we've been talking about in this series, we've just been using water and stories through the scriptures to give us some things to think about. For today, this is the first time in quite some time that we've not done basically just working through a book of the Bible. But in fact, one of the fun things that you can know about Heart of Junction, we planted our church 27 years ago. And with our last sermon series, we finished the Bible finally, which is awesome because now we can quit and go home. And no, we can't, because it took 27 years for us to get all the way through the Bible. And even at that, there's a couple of portions, especially of Exodus, that have never been read in the church. Exodus and Numbers that have never been read during a sermon here. And that's how hard it is to get the whole Bible into your life just by coming to church. Every week without missing for 27 years, you would almost have it all. But for this period, we're going through this series on water. We've been using a lot of water stories. I think last week was Jesus' miracle at Cana, turned the water into wine. I have been so preoccupied, I'm not sure I remember totally. This week we're going to be dealing with the flood from Genesis chapter 6. So if you want to turn to Genesis chapter 6, you can join me there in a second. Each week as we've been talking about water in the Bible and kind of you sticking with the theme of flowing faith, every week the water portion of the story relates somehow to our faith. Today, we're going to be looking at faith in a world that rebels against God. And so we are in Genesis chapter 6, and the story of the flood basically occupies 4 chapters, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 6, 7, and 8 get you through the flood. 9 sort of talks about post-flood. And there is so much to talk about with that is interesting, and rabbit trails. And it's a good spot to literally have a sermon series that would last you maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months and just spend it entirely on the flood. There's so much to think about, so much to know. There's a lot to speculate about. We actually have an expert in the building today. Scott back there teaches this stuff. And Scott, if I say anything that's weird, you can correct me. I think the flood probably happened about 4,500 years ago. Is that about where you are? I'm going to just ask you some questions. I think that the number of people who died in the flood probably was between 500 million and 1 billion. Do you have a guess on that? Goes all the way from about 10,000 to one guy says 10 trillion. Yeah. 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 So lots of guesses, but it was a lot. And we believe, as Bible-believing Christians, that this is the worst disaster that's ever struck the earth. And there's 2 things going on in the world today that makes me not want to dwell on certain aspects of the story today. But one is just the general culture. There's a lot to compare and a lot to maybe think about that we can relate to. The other is, especially with all of our friends from Texas, my son, he's our I would say he's our normal music leader, but he's not normal in any way. I just put him on the airplane yesterday to go to Austin, and so he's down there in the middle of all that, and trying to get to the camps that he's going to be working with this week, and then we have all our friends from Texas, and there is so much going on with those floods in Texas. The numbers of deaths that I'm hearing, I'm actually grateful for, because I thought it was going to be a lot higher than what I'm hearing. But there's a lot of families that are just suffering tragedies and unbearable loss, and so all of this is it's part of the story, and that's the great dichotomy of the flood story. On one hand, you have the idea that the flood is often represented even in children's nurseries and things like that, where there's animals painted on the walls. I can look back there and see ours, and see the animals painted on the walls, smiling giraffes, because giraffes smile a lot apparently, little happy pandas. Noah's in there. It's a story of redemption and mercy, and it's bright and colorful, and you've got that kind of above the waterline view of the flood, but then you have the view of the flood that's below the waterline, that is a disaster, that is a tragedy, that is a worldwide calamity, and it's a punishment, and it's an ugliness that just has to be noticed and paid attention to. So you got both sides, and both sides are represented in what we're going to talk about today. And because of the fact that I can't do the entire story, I am going to just use the first bit of chapter 6. If you're looking at the notes, which there's nothing to fill in any blanks today, but 3 of the lines are written in blue. And what I want you to recognize just before we get going is that those blue lines are talking about the story of the flood that's above the waterline. It's the stuff that's good for us. It's the hopeful stuff. It's the helpful stuff. Anything that's written in black is just, this is below the waterline. This is the stuff that we want to avoid. This is the lessons that we want to learn may cause us to remove ourselves from some of this. So this story, though, we can relate to it, I think, in the world today. And I want to read the story beginning in chapter 6, verse 1. And I'm probably going to go through about verse 17. It says, when men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. If you're paying any attention to who I was talking to a few minutes ago, and you already have questions, he not only would love to answer you, but he can tell you the next time he's talking about it professionally, okay? So that's one of those places. Who were these people? They married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. And again, there's kind of some speculation. Is the 120 years referencing the fact that life expectancies prior to the flood were very long? Moses is already around 500, and that seems old to me, but he's still having kids. And then it could also be a reference to the fact that God is giving the people of earth a chance to repent. And it is about 120 years might be the time frame they have before this ark is built. And after that, though, I'm just going to be done with you. But it's a reference to the fact that there's going to come a point in time where you do not get to decide anything anymore. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Folks generally think that maybe Goliath might have descended from that. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, and that in every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all of the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made men on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Was it a mistake that he made us? No, that's not what this is talking about. But his creation is bringing grief into his spirit. And so it says, Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I'm going to warn you right now that in the early service, I referred to Noah as Moses about 9 times. I do not know why I'm doing that, but just beware. You know who we're talking about. It says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you're to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. It's going to be huge. Then he says, I'm going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. And then it says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you, your wives, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. And gives them instructions. We kind of generally know the story. The ark is built over the course of a long period of time. There was a little preaching from Noah to say, repent. And at a point, he gathered all the animals and his family, came into the ark, closed it up. It rained for 40 days. They floated on the water for about a year. They finally found some dry land. They parked there for several months and got out, and the earth was repopulated from that point forward. And there is so much about the story that has 3 verses at a time that are entirely worthy of a sermon. But today we're going to focus on the part that I want to think about is just faith in a world that is rebellious against God. And so he talks about the condition of the world. In verse 5, he said that the wickedness of man was great. He also says in verse 5 that the imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil. This is interesting. We see people kind of debate good and bad, good and evil, but not like we used to see it. Now the debate seems to be over what I want versus what you want me to do. And there's not a lot of consideration about good and evil. It's mostly about desire and what I like. And even in the battle in our own hearts, in our own minds, that's kind of where the fight seems to be a lot of times. It's like, if I do this, I can have that. If I do this, then I can have that. And maybe I won't have to do something, and maybe I won't have to work as hard or whatever. But the fight in our mind is less and less about what is right, and it's more and more about what we want. And I think that that's worth paying attention to. This time of life, the time of the world's history that we live in, I know a lot of us, a lot of my friends, think this is the worst time ever in the history of the world. And it's really interesting how this kind of gets played out. And I have a little perspective, simply from, I think, being overseas close to 40 times in my life. And I know my trips overseas are fairly limited. Whenever I'm in Europe or whatever, it's usually because I'm on the way to somewhere that doesn't have any money. And I spent a lot of time in Russia and Belarus and doing things there. And in the last 10 years or so, it's been in Kenya and Africa. And it's kind of funny. Perspective is weird. But we're looking at the world and we go, this is a terrible world. And the way people are looking at it, it's like, this world is terrible because these other people are in it. And we're literally debating in America, arguing for the belief that there has never been a worse time in history or a worse place to be than America right now. And it's for those of us that are like, what are you talking about? That just sounds like craziness to us. But for those that are worried about the things that they're seeing, it sounds crazy to them for us to say, no, this place isn't that bad. It's just not that bad. But it's just like, it's what he's talking about here in the scripture fits so well with what we see. Wickedness of man, imagination and thoughts was only evil. The earth is corrupt. We think about, well, there's never been corruption like now. It's filled with violence. And all of this stuff, this is the condition of God's judgment. But we need to be careful. My experience is, even though I have a little bit, and I have another place that kind of gives me a little point of reference, and for the last 2 years, I have been reading regularly through presidential biographies. And I'm on about my 15th president right now. And I'm kind of moving through a little bit, and I've not done everybody. There's a couple I want to go back and get, but I've not done Andrew Jackson yet, and I kind of want to get him. But right now, I'm doing a book that doubles up on Theodore Roosevelt and William Taft, and it's an amazing book. One of the things I've noticed in listening to all of this is everything that I hear about in the news, that everybody's like, this is so crazy. Nobody's ever behaved like this. Yes, they did, all of the time. Thomas Jefferson would have been an awful lot like Donald Trump if he had TikTok and Facebook available to him. He would have done it. John Adams and George Washington would have been engaged in some of the most horrific public fights that you would have ever seen if they had access to the wide world of information the way we have it and the way we can put it out. They're not talking about anything new. All this stuff that everybody's talking about today, that well, capitalism is the worst thing in the history of the world and it's ruining the environment. These were the exact same conversations that Theodore Roosevelt was working with. His entire presidency was kind of centered around taking power away from the rich and kind of doing things that were good for everybody. And every battle that he had would have been as ugly then as it is today if they just had the internet at their fingertips. There's really, Solomon said it. There is nothing new under the sun. The world we live in is rebellious. There is no doubt about it. It's louder. It's just louder than it's ever been before. And so we can see it and we can hear it all the time. And it's the condition of the world that God was angry with. We just are more sensitive to it than anybody's ever been in the history of the world. And so we get set up in the context of this angry, contemptuous, rebellious world out there that I think has a lot of beauty in it if we would just stop fighting and talking and step back a little bit and enjoy with each other. But in the midst of all of this, there is a man named Noah that's pointed out for a distinction. His character, his relationship with God has set him apart. And so he says that he was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He was just, he was upright, and he was sincere. And this is the view that we're looking for. This is what we want to emulate in our lives right now. There were years ago it was easy to do this. When I was a college student, 44 years ago, good grief, I could walk around the campus with a T-shirt that talked about Jesus, and our shirts weren't near as inventive or near as awesome back then, but we had them, and it would just say something like Jesus is my, or I remember the one I had. It was bodybuilding by Jesus, and I remember that one. And you could walk around campus all day, nobody would say anything. I'm not sure at CMU if anybody would say anything today, but it's more likely. There are campuses in America where if you have a shirt that has a cross on it or mentions the word Jesus, you can be expelled and charged with terroristic threats. Evergreen College is one of them, and it is a zero tolerance policy there on Christian shirts and hats and things like that. And it's like, it used to be just easy. Now it's a little more difficult. If you stand up for your faith, you're going to find yourself maybe being challenged and maybe being pushed. And not pushed in the context of what's right and wrong, but pushed in the context of what I want and what you want. And it's like, I want you to love Jesus, and they're talking to me saying, I want you to keep your mouth shut and not bother me about this. You're just as bad as I am. In fact, if you're a Christian in a lot of places, you're worse than they are. And it's not even a comparison. It's just like, I do not want to do anything that you're talking about. Stop talking to me about any of this. Get out of here. I want to do my thing. And so we're trying to do that. Noah, though, is just. He's living in a world where it's even worse than what I'm describing. He's living in a world where he's the only one that stands out as just, righteous, and sincere. I like Micah 6:8. Remember that verse? In my NIV Bible, it says, he has shown you, O man. In the ESV, it says, he has shown you, mortal. And the idea is that you're going to die. And we get back to this, the thought that's coming out of this passage already. And he says, he has shown you, O man, what you must do. Because you're to act justly, which it says Noah was righteous and just, upright and sincere, depending on your translation, but it's the same thing. You act justly. You do things that are just. You love mercy. Your heart directs your behavior, and your heart is centered around the idea that I care very, very much about the people that are around me, whether they're my style or not, whether they're in my tribe or not. Everyone has a fair chance because I love mercy, and I'm ultimately striving to see fairness exhibited in the world, and walk humbly with our God. And that's part of what Noah, I think I did it. I said Moses a minute ago, didn't I? That's what Noah is up to here. He's walking humbly with God. In fact, one of the things that's interesting about the story of the flood is, if you want to kind of do a trick that I did this week, you go look through the story, especially through the first 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8, and write down everything that Noah says to God in the middle of the craziest instructions to a human that God's maybe ever given. And you'll find something out very interesting. Noah never says a word. You don't need a very big sheet of paper, and you don't need to have ink in your pen if you're going to write that stuff down. He doesn't say anything. He's not doing a battle with God. He's not saying, this is crazy. What can we do to fix this? Why me? He's not doing any of that. He is simply being obedient to anything God asks him to do. And I think that's amazing. We have chances to do a little bit of that in our life. And it kind of comes to in this next section where we look at the warnings that God says, my spirit's not going to contend with man forever. Your version might say strive with man forever. Verse 3, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. There's like a time limit. But here's part of the above the waterline thing. It sounds like maybe this is a negative, but it's an incredible positive that God does strive with us for a time, that he contends with us for a time, that he battles against our soul for a time. I always, if I have to do a funeral for a child or for a young person, somebody that dies out of season, if you know what I mean, cancer or something that gets a young person. And a lot of times those funerals are people that aren't part of our church, and they're not always connected to God very much. And I always encourage them to kind of fight with God to find your peace here. And, I think about Jacob wrestling the angel and not giving up until the angel blesses him. And he walks with a limp for the rest of his life because of that battle. But I think it's good for us to strive and contend with God. And he strives and contends with us. And it's a good thing that he does this. There's things that happen when he does this. When the Spirit of God strives with us, he convicts us of sin. He just does. And we need this. We need this desperately. Because this isn't just about like making that one decision that I'm going to steal $500 and I'm going to buy a gun and shoot somebody with it, I guess that's like a couple of decisions, but it's like it can be so much more subtle than that. It can be kind of that slippery hill type of an approach. I watched a movie the other night that I thought was really funny. I really thought it was funny. And, while I was watching it, I was like, in fact, I think I might have said with my mouth, we shouldn't be watching this. But I didn't stop. I watched all the way, even watched the closing credits to see if there's going to be something funny in there, right? And then you know what I did the very next day? I got listening to a sermon from a pastor in Africa, and he's talking about the places that we wouldn't dare invite Jesus into with us. And he's talking about movies. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't pay to take Jesus to this movie, but I really hope if he was watching it with me, he would think it was funny too. You know what I mean? But the whole time it's going on, when we do things like that, there's a voice that's telling us, you shouldn't be doing this. And this is what striving with God's Spirit is about. And he's telling us. And we literally have to fight it. It's one of the things. I got saved 44 years ago, again, when I was 18 years old. I got saved. And one of the things that happened to me immediately, I could tell it from the second day after I accepted Jesus. Before that, if I wanted to sin, I had no problem at all. I could just do it. I could sin if I wanted to. After that, every single time in my life since then, not a single time have I ever committed a sin in the last 44 years that the voice in my head that is the Spirit of God was telling me, you shouldn't do this. This is wrong. And then it's the only way I know that old Britney Spears song, right? Some of you are laughing already. It's like, oops, I did it again. And it's like, is it my fault? No. because it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm better than everybody else. But this stuff, righteousness, isn't relative. And that's one of the things that the Spirit will do with us. He not only will convict us of sin, but it'll point us towards righteousness. And we sort of get the idea that my righteousness is relative to everybody else. And the way the whole freaking world is right now, it's not very hard to be in the good pile. In fact, that's the one thing that people are doing pretty regularly that is maybe a little bit more connected to what this is about in the world. It's like people will tell you why you're bad. And a lot of times our argument is, but this isn't bad. This is good. No, you're judgmental. But judgment's like a good thing, you know? We should be able to rightly judge things. Prejudging is maybe not good, but we struggle with some of these things. And the Spirit of God will point us towards righteousness, but it's not relative. It's like we can line ourselves up, everybody on the face of the earth, who's the most righteous to the least righteous, and it's not like, well, I'm way more righteous than a lot of these people, but if you're not across the line where you are considered righteous, then you're outside the circle, and you just need to know that. We need to pay attention to that. And so the Spirit, when he strives with us, will not only convict us and point us towards righteousness, but he'll warn us of judgment. And this is the place that we want to kind of pay attention to. There comes a time when the Spirit no longer strives against us. And this, I maybe mentioned it already, it's going to happen in one of two ways. One is your heart is going to become so hardened that you just never have to worry about it anymore. You've given up. You've gone over to the other side. The other is you're just going to physically die. And you don't know when either one of those days is going to come. And none of us do. And so we want to pay attention to that because we just don't know. Jesus warns us. He takes the flood story in Matthew 24, verse 36, and he kind of tells us to pay attention. That the flood story is not only there as a part of biblical history, but it's sitting there as a warning to us to pay attention to where we are in our relationship with God. Are we rebellious and against him, or are we striving to be like Noah and walking uprightly? He says, no one knows about the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That's how it's going to be for us when the Son of Man comes. And I don't know if we're going to be here when Jesus returns to the earth. I do know that we're going to have a moment in our life history where we encounter Jesus, and it's going to be encountered in the sense of judgment. And so we don't want to be like the people that were just outside of the ark, and we're heading towards a judgment that Noah knew was coming. He knew it was coming. They thought they were getting away with things. They might have thought that God didn't even exist anymore. If he did, he was not that interested in what's going on in the world. He's very interested in what's going on in the world. The story of the flood is evidence of that. They might have even thought that God won't judge them, that if God exists, that he's going to judge us with a great amount of mercy and leniency. And he does, but only if we do the thing that can make us righteous. And the only thing that can make us righteous is accepting Jesus as our Lord and Savior. And so I want to encourage you to recognize that this flood story teaches us to battle against the idea of being rebellious and thinking it's not that big of a deal, of walking around with our eyes closed and just thinking it's not that big of a deal. Next week we're going to be ordaining Chris Hayes, and he's going to preach our sermon for us next week. I want to encourage you to be here for that. But right now, Zach, will you lead us through the Lord's Supper?
Yeah, so our buddy Quint going to come up, and I think I'm going to ask Mark. I know you're holding a kid, but she's old enough to sit on her own. So come on up and help us. So here's how this is going to work. Quint is going to share a thought for us. I'd like you to listen to him and think about it. Mark and Darren and I are going to pass out the bread and the juice. Don't drink either one, or eat the bread or drink the juice until Quint says that it's time, right? So you're going to have to be holding both for a moment. Are you prepared for that?
Father, thank you so much. Got one more song, right? Thank you so much for guiding us through our Sunday. We just ask, Lord, that as we gather together and come to you, Father, as the family of God, as the bride of Christ, that you would be with us as we go through the remainder of our day. Father, I want to ask, Father, that if any of us have just kind of listened to this and thought, you know, I've got sin in my life, and I need to let go of a lot of it. I want to remove myself from it. That, Father, while we close this last song, we might take advantage of the opportunity to turn it over to you. Lord, it's in Jesus' name I pray.